Good evening. I'm Socrates Garrett, and we're broadcasting live from right here in Jackson, Mississippi, the heart of the Deep South, right here in the African-American-owned broadcasting studio. We believe digital.com, our own platform. And so it's critically important that in the African-American community, we control the narrative. I look forward to receiving opportunities to show and advertise your products for goods and services and to move your brand along in this community. We're broadcasting live on Facebook. When We Believe Digital Podcast, go to Roku and download our app, and We Believe Global, with shows like this to bring articulate, intelligent conversations and dialogue to our platform. So I'm here to continue sounding the alarm. This is how the South is going to rise again. Good evening and welcome to Socrates Garrett Live. We're broadcasting live right here from Jackson, Mississippi, in the heart of the deep, deep South. You know, I like to say that the South is going to rise again, but this time it's going to have a new captain. There's going to be African Americans in charge, given an opportunity to see if they can't move Mississippi from the very bottom to somewhere in the middle. We don't have aspirations to move to the top just yet, but we gotta get off the bottom down here in Mississippi. And there's a reason that we maintain that position is because we have the most diverse communities in the entire world. Mississippi has over 40% African Americans, the largest number of black folks concentrated in any given state. I think Alabama may challenge that sometimes, but we know that there are more African Americans in Mississippi than anywhere else. And that goes to tell you that at one point in time, there were more African Americans in Mississippi than Europeans back during the days of slavery. And so we had a brutal experience to get to this point. And the vestiges of that experience are now playing out in many ways that are undesirable. And we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about why African Americans are being treated. But Mississippi has the great diversity of African Americans, and yet we don't see that as our strength. You know, we should be the #1 tourist destination in the world. Think about it. With our history of oppression, our Civil Rights Museum has probably got more artifacts in it that people from all over the world want to look at than anywhere else in the world. Think about it when you take them to Philadelphia, Mississippi, and they're able to see the dam that the 3 civil rights marchers and fighters were buried, some say alive. Think about it when you can then take them to the home of Medgar Evers, where he was gunned down in his driveway. All that's part of our heritage, and it should be a part of that tour that we offer folk that want to come and see. People from all over the world are coming to Mississippi to talk to African American leaders like myself and others to see how is it that we are able to get along in Mississippi and how do we overcome all of the differences that we might have. Those differences are pronounced. They are real. We have challenges here today that are equal to, if not greater than, the challenges of the early 1900s, the mid-1800s. Our history is something that we have to talk about. But we want to talk about it and then turn it into an economic bonanza, turn it into something that generates interest in Mississippi and brings every man with a good mind, a good heart. Every person that really cares about their fellow man should be on their way to Mississippi right now. For too long, we've ignored the South and allowed bigotry and racism to run rampant, keeping the South down when it's in fact the most fertile land in the whole United States of America. Southeastern America is the most prominent, most influential, most diverse place in the world. When we think about Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and Georgia, just think about that region. Fertile land, rivers running right through the heart of that region. And yet we'll find ourselves on the very bottom. And we're going to change that. And we're going to change that by articulating with you and dialoguing with you on this platform. So if you're watching us on Facebook, we want you to share this program with your friends and family and send us stars. We're beginning to get more stars than ever before. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Get a subscription there. It'll help us monetize that platform. If you're watching us on Roku TV, where our app sits right there next to Showtime and Netflix, check us out. Download the app and watch our programs. If you're watching us on our very own platform, and let's just be clear about this. We didn't come into the marketplace to be sharecroppers. We didn't come in here to just say that we can find us on Facebook on their platform, or find us on Roku on their platform, or find us on YouTube on their platform. No. We came in here to build and create our very own platform. Today it's called WeBelieveDigital.com. Now you can call in tonight and join this discussion at 800-492-5186. WeBelieveDigital.com platform is uniquely different. If you have a platform that chronicles the history of African Americans when they don't want to teach CRT in the schools, if you have a platform that is a keeper of that knowledge that your children can come to and see what these programs were like 50 years from today, just think about how empowering that's going to be. I think about all that I miss because I'm unable to go back and listen to the many speeches of Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey. I'm unable to capture the moments that Emmett Till went through, or better yet, the moments that Du Bois went through. And so if you were able to do that then, we wouldn't have such a gap in our history, and we would be a proud people. Because from there, we should get all the way back to Africa, where our parents were kings and queens, and where civilization started on the banks of the Nile. We should be walking around with our chests poked out. We should be walking with our heads held high because of our great history and the great legacy of our race. But we're not. We're beat down, we've succumbed to the oppressor, and now we're acting out. We're acting out in a way that's unacceptable, and we're turning on ourselves each and every day. See, it's not white flight that's making urban cities bad. It's black flight that's moving out, that's causing this great demise. You know, it's the talented 10th. Du Bois talked about the talented 10th. Of course, he had some issues with Booker T. Washington, who believed that you ought to just let your buckets down where you are and build from there. But Du Bois said, give me the talented 10th and I'll build a new world. Our talented 10th has moved out to the suburb with the traditional oppressor and left in these inner cities fatherless homes, children that are in great poverty and despair. It's drug infested. It's a food desert. And then we wonder why they act out. It's clear to me our leadership left the community. And so our schools are being threatened by takeover and the Institute of Charter Schools designed to close down public schools. It's clear to me why this is. African Americans have betrayed one another. And we're going to have to fix that. We're going to fix it by putting it on the table each and every day. Now, as always, my most eloquent and competent co-host, Dr. Eldridge Henderson, is here. And Dr. Henderson, we're glad to have you in the studio, and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Socrates. I appreciate the opportunity. And I just want to say it appears that you love Mississippi. That's wonderful. You see that there's a lot of potential here, and that's good. Some people say otherwise. I agree with that, of course, that there is no limit as to what people can do in Mississippi if they had good leaders, had the opportunity to work together, and the ability to plan and delegate and put timelines on major projects. Almost anything can happen, starting in 30, 60, or 90 days. I guarantee you.
Well, Doc, you once said to me, and often I catch you on your other radio show that comes on Thursday evenings, and I believe you have a new show coming on Tuesdays.
Yes, on Tuesdays, 11 to 11:30 on WMPR 90.1 FM, Jackson, Mississippi.
I believe that's an African-American run and operated radio station.
It is.
I believe it's 100,000 watts of broadcast
100,000.
power.
Exactly.
And so you should be able to get your message out there.
Well, I intend to do so.
That is a wonderful thing. Now, Doc, I was talking about the black man, and we got to talk about him because that's who we love, and that's who we want to see do better. We got to talk about his condition and what we got to do to change that, because Jackson, Mississippi, no different than Birmingham and other urban cities, are, experiencing behavior from African Americans that we've not witnessed before. And so what is it that's causing this new man to act out in this way?
Well, the new man that was created by conditions, laws, and neglect from the local through the national level are these people that were not able to focus on themselves due to their circumstances. We've had opportunities in the past, Mr. Socrates, to have more oppression than we have today, and we were doing better. Right after slavery, until the period that they call Reconstruction. Right after slavery, blacks started big churches, universities, burial associations, funeral homes, hospitals, clinics, loan associations, mutual aid societies. They were having conventions all over the United States right after slavery. And then a few years after that period, around 1868, they started something called Reconstruction. Black were voting. They were in the Sheriff Department, Department of Education, in the House and the Senate, on the local and federal levels, and they had an opportunity to do some great things for 5 to 7 years. And after then, we had a replication of slavery for blacks up until the 1960s, roughly to 1964.
Now let's talk about that for a minute. There were not many cars in the possession of black folk at that time, and yet you're saying that they were holding conventions all across the country, and they were homeowners and landowners and entrepreneurs and building churches and schools and hospitals?
That's exactly what they were doing.
How were they able to do that?
Well, they had something that we don't have today. They were able to vision, have a mission statement, set goals and objectives, and then do what all people do that want something: pool their resources, work with their own leaders, delegate things to others that they couldn't do, and have a timeline and guidelines to follow and an end date, and things happen for at least 8 years in America that were very significant as far as black people are concerned.
So black people had a plan.
That's what they had.
They had a plan, and they had unity. And so they had their collective genius. They had cooperatives. They provided and produced and sold to themselves. So they had an economy.
That's right, which we don't have today.
Which we do not
We do not have a black community anywhere in America that is self-supporting. In not one state out of the 50 states. We have a lot of neighborhoods, but we don't have a black community that could sustain itself for 2 weeks without going outside of their community to get food, clothing, build and maintain their shelters, get transportation and money. We would starve to death in less than 30 days.
Less than 30 days, all black communities in the whole USA would starve to death in less than 30 days if they had to maintain inside of their own boundaries.
That's right. That is a fact.
We could not survive more than 30 days.
Most could make 30 days.
Now, Doc, that simply means then that while we think we are deciding what we're going to eat today, that in fact others are deciding whether we're going to eat.
That's exactly right. And others are deciding that you are not going to eat very well because we are not going to feed you in communities where we don't make a big profit. So we are going to leave you. You're not going to have any food that we provide. And if you don't have money, which you are not going to have much, you're locked out of the education system, so we're going to take our banks out of your community. We're going to take our car dealerships out of your community, our hotels, and everything, and you're coming to us, the few that have the funds to do so, and we're going to take that.
Now, Doc, every week we kind of hit these points, and I think some might think that, that we were being redundant. But from what I see, there is a new charge, a new mount to displace African Americans and take away the little gains that we've had that's being implemented all across the country at an alarming rate.
Well, that is a fact. Not only is this happening in Mississippi, it's happening in the South, in the United States, and especially in Africa, and everywhere there's a community of black people, everywhere in the world.
So why is it that some would say that, blacks don't have anything to complain about? They got a black president in the United States of America, and so clearly there couldn't be any oppression or racism. What do you say to that?
Oh, that's a lot of propaganda. The black president we had were very interested in maintaining his status and his reputation, so he was not going to make any serious alignment with blacks, and will not, never, even if we have one in the future, if he wants to stay in office, specifically make a channel directly to the blacks and black leadership and champion their cause. Just not going to happen, because he was not put in office for that reason, and they will never be put in. If you get someone like Jesse Jackson, for instance, Shirley Chisholm, and Dick Gregory and others that were presidential candidates, they talked, moved, got good votes, but they never were taken serious because they couldn't win because too many people were going to oppose them.
Are you saying that whites are selecting our leaders for us?
In most cases, of course. Anytime you find that a majority of the European Americans support any black candidate for a political, civic, or any position, you have to suspect that person as being what I call slightly abused, and he doesn't have, or she doesn't have, a lot of independence.
So let me just give our viewers a little lesson here, if you allow me.
Okay.
Now, Jackson, Mississippi is 85% black. It is the capital of the state of Mississippi. And yet, the city is being invaded, much like Ukraine. Our leadership, European leadership here, which are in many cases our relatives, our cousins and brothers and all of that kind of stuff, because keep in mind, Mississippi has got the highest number of African Americans anywhere in the world, and they have the highest number of mulattoes anywhere in the world as well. And so that's why I say, you're talking about your brother and your sister and your cousin in many cases. But the oppression is gearing up at a level greater than I've seen in the past. And that's when I see that Jackson, because it's ruled and governed by African Americans, is being invaded. We recently had a serious undertaken by our state legislature to take our airport from us because it's run by African Americans. The airport is Charles Evers International Airport, but no one wanted it to be named that, and it's not called that now. And so we had to fight to get it named after Charles Evers, and then we have to fight now to try to retain it as a city asset. It's on a tremendous threat to be taken away from us by our very own sisters and brothers in the legislature that are white. Now, behind that, we then wanted to take over the 1% sales tax, where black folk voted by 90% to increase their taxes that they pay for food and hotels so that they could improve the streets and the infrastructure in their city. And we tax ourselves when we do school bonds. We are trying as a group of citizens to say that we're willing to pay to make this place a better place. But no matter what we do, the attack is still on and coming forward stronger than ever. Now, we're up against a commercial break, so we're going to take this break and we're going to come back and continue to involve you in this discussion about what is happening to African Americans throughout America. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Have you had your Earth Blend coffee today? At Earth Blend Coffee, we take pride in offering you the very best of beans across the world, blended and roasted to perfection, giving you superior quality and satisfying and flavorful taste. Experience the world in one cup with Earth Blend Coffee.
To order, visit earthblendcoffee.co now.
Socrates Garrett ENT.com is a diversified firm specializing in recycled aggregates and crushed concrete. Socrates Garrett ENT.com's recycled materials provide the construction industry with significant economic and environmental benefits by recycling clean concrete rubble into M.Dot grade rock materials. Recycled aggregates and crushed concrete can be applied to driveways, road construction, bank protection, parking lots, general bulk fills, and more. For more information, please call 601-896-0084 or visit us online at SocratesGarrettENT.com.
Back to Socrates Garrett Live. We're broadcasting live from right here in Jackson, Mississippi, in the heart of the deep, deep South. My co-host, Dr. Henderson, said that I really love Mississippi. And I guess there must be some truth in that since I'm still here. We talk about the devastation that has occurred here, but we're still here. We're still fighting to try and make a difference and make Mississippi a better place. But we believe that Mississippi could be the better place. It is ideally positioned in a region where the climate is good year-round, where they're fishing and hunting, where interstates intersect 55 and 20. We should be a transportation hub, where we got the Mississippi Delta, the most fertile land in the world, can grow anything in Mississippi. We have 8 institutions in Mississippi, yet we're last in education, but it's not because we don't have the most buildings for education. We're last because of the remnants and the effects of segregation and integration, so-called integration, and what it was designed to do. Now, Dr. Henderson, I believe you come from a region where there are 2 or 3 universities within 50 miles of one another. One of them being Mississippi Valley, one of them being Delta State. How did those 2 universities get so close to one another?
Well, they have, at that period, where there must be a separation between the races in churches, in education, and in housing. No matter what happened, and no matter how much money or education or training they had. Unless there were a few favorites involved, there always were. You mentioned the fact that we have a lot of mulattoes in Mississippi. Now, there were many instances where those people, some of the males and females, were taken care of. Now, they would attend one of the universities that you mentioned, Alcorn, Jackson State, Mississippi Valley, or Tougaloo. But many were sent out of the state throughout the years and returned as potential leaders and got those first jobs doing affirmative action in banks, in government, in business. They were the first group that got those opportunities.
Those were the offsprings of the Europeans.
That's right, of the Europeans. And a lot of people don't like to believe that when I tell them. So I tell them, if you don't think I'm telling you the fact, find an old newspaper in the late 1960s and 70s and find out and look at who they appointed and gave jobs to in the banks, other businesses. You might find a young black worker sitting at the desk with a master's degree as a called person. You might find a black man with a BS degree as a banker. Most of those people didn't have any real responsibilities because they never made any decisions. They were what you call plants and appearance individuals to show that things have been integrated. Now it's just the opposite. They found that a lot of black people now think they are in heaven because they are appointed or elected to positions. They still don't have any major responsibility and expectations from the people that put them in office because they are not strong enough to carry out projects because many don't have the leadership skills to work with people that don't lack. They criticize their enemies too much, the bankers, their fellow politicians, those in opposing parties. As an elected official or appointed person in politics, in religion, in any other segment of society, the people have to work together. But at the same time, you have to have a plan like they had right after slavery, that if I can't work with you in your community, I'm going to create my own community and pool your resources and make it happen. But that does not happen in this century. It does not happen.
Well, we got to talk about that. I mean, the fact that the black man is hated as much as he is, and yet in many ways he is related to his oppressor. That is a real interesting situation.
That is a fact.
If we don't take my word for it, go back and take a look at Frederick Douglass and take a look at Du Bois, and just tell me what you think they came across?
Well, look at the deal, and I just told you. Now, if you want to see the other side of it, you look at all the big famous preachers, black preachers during that time in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s. Look at the black presidents of the black colleges and universities. Look at them. Look at the black homecoming queens and kings of these black colleges and high schools prior to 1970. They were all high yellow, and that means they had at least a white grandfather or a white mother. And many of them had fathers that were Caucasians during that very time, living in the same city, because I had a lot of relatives like that. And you probably had some. For instance, in my area, we had several families that lived across the track, right in a certain town in Hinds County. Their kids were white. The lady never did get married. We all knew who she was friendly with. Her kids did not go to private school. She sent her kids to Catholic school in Jackson, Mississippi. They did not play with black kids, and they were looked at as outsiders in both communities. Now, that is a historical fact, and it's happened all over America. and especially in certain counties in Virginia and other places where they had those breeding farms, where they had the young male, Caucasian male, 15 and up, that had the ability and the responsibility and the expectation to create as many children as he could. The uncles, the brothers of the owners, the landlords, and the foremen on the plantation all had a responsibility, and most had a desire, because it was not looked down on as long as you don't recognize the slave person as a human. You didn't worry about it. Everybody knew it, and many times you find, sir, that this is acceptable today, because when you are in power and have those things that I mentioned the other day that keeps you in power, that is money, land, and connections, you can get away with anything you want. And the bad news about that, when you have those qualities, land, money, and power, you want to keep it. And your ability to keep it from others is something you're going to put 24 hours a day on. And when things get tight, you are going to relent just a little to give the neck holes some time to breathe, and that's when you're going to find your own blacks, your own Hispanics or whatever, to put in these so-called fake and illusionary positions of responsibility, because you need time to plan on how to get rid of that group.
Wow. Wow, you said a lot. I think we ought to go back and give the viewers all over the world just a little bit of a lesson about Mississippi history. And I know that our governor does not want me to do this. I get that. I get that. I know that the state of Mississippi has banned the teaching of African American history in schools, especially the critical race theory as it was presented. And even though it was not being taught, Mississippi instituted a law to keep it from ever being taught. So I get that they don't want Dr. Henderson and I to share these stories. But you see, Mississippi was a home of the Choctaw Nation. There were more Choctaw Indians up in the northeast part of Mississippi than anywhere in the country. This was headquarters. The Natchez Indians down on the southern side of the state, Chickasaw up on the northern corner. So this was an Indian country. And there was never a great war in Mississippi that defeated the Choctaws. That's interesting. You see all of the big stories about Sitting Bull and Geronimo and all of that, where they had the great battles out west. But down here in the South, we didn't have a great war that we can refer back to where the Choctaws were defeated. And so how then did they lose their land and their power if there was no war? And you see, it's important to understand that, because Indians, just like they did at Plymouth Rock, same thing they did in Kosciuszko, Mississippi, they welcomed Europeans into their land. And the reason they did that, in many cases, was because we needed to infuse new blood into society to make it stronger. Many people don't believe this, but the mixing of the blood produces a stronger individual. And so they were defeated from the inside. The Treaty of Dancing Rabbit. Europeans married inside of the Choctaw Nation and became assistant chief with the intent from day one to take over the entire nation. And so then Mississippi came to a point where it said that it's going to have reclassification in Mississippi. That means there will be no Indians in the state of Mississippi. You're either going to be black or you're going to be white. And many of you have read about and heard about the Trail of Tears and the tremendous struggle and tragedy that went on with the Indians being marched out to Oklahoma. And the folks that were remaining got classified as either black or white. So many black families were divided right down the middle. Half of them were classified as white, the other half was classified as black. And with that designation, that classification, they started to turn on one another. All you have to do is classify us differently. You don't have to tell us anything other than tomorrow you're white. And immediately you would take on the ways and the actions of the oppressor. Dr. Henderson, why is it that we're so susceptible to that?
Well, because it is very clear, and history proves it throughout the world in all major nations. When a suppressor tells you that you are just like him and you're better than others, even though you are part of the other, you believe that. You want to look like it, act like him, talk like it. Look at what happened to the Indians that you were talking about. When those Americans, which we called then the European Americans, because we didn't have a lot of states then in the United States, we had territories. They did exactly what you said, moved in those areas, married up with those Indians, and they had a lot of sons and daughters that were half Indians, half Caucasians. They got those young people in positions where they taught them trades. Some went to, believe it or not, to the military academy, those white boys that could pass up to about 90% as white. They were given opportunities to have their land and plantations. They were given opportunities to have their slaves. And then they got real smart. They said, we have so many mulattoized Indians here, we're going to have to say our sons and daughters are going to have to be civilized. So they designated some of the Indians as the civilized tribes. And they fought and fought. They couldn't win. And they said, now we got them divided. So they then had groups of Indians to fight against each other. And they got the numbers down to the point where those that had been initially white and then second accepted into the civilized tribes that had land, had property, had slaves that were passing and then passed for white with this new classification, they left those people alone. And during this time, some were in the Senate, they had big businesses, and the others that were so-called uncivilized and colored, and those that had to intermingle with the blacks, had to get out of Dodge and had to get out quick. Mm-hmm. And they were moving those boys and girls and men and women during the winter season. And as they would get sick, they would beat them. If they could move on, many times they'd just leave them for the wild animals. I used to teach this stuff in school when I was a school teacher. And if you find the primary sources, newspaper, magazines, you won't find it in his textbooks. You will find that this is actually what happened. They put them in the worst part of the United States at that time, Oklahoma and places like that, barren land. They killed all the buffaloes and most of the rabbits, just destroyed the economic base for the so-called Indians and say, we're going to get you out of town and we're going to take you to Oklahoma. We're going to give you food, clothing, and shelter and give you a reservation to live on, and you don't come off it unless I give you permission. And that is a simple way for others to understand that all of these things are planned because the European Americans wanted to control the land, the power, the money, and all the decision-making. And they did it by destructive means, but it turned out to be legal to do so because they passed legislation prior to the Declarations of Independence on the colonial level where they started saying certain people couldn't do certain things. When they finally got to the point where they had something called a small United States with the Declaration of Independence and later with the Constitution, they still excluded everybody except white folks, white males specifically. Now, these are historical facts. And you can find some of this in some of the old textbooks, a page or two, or a paragraph or two. But if you look at the primary sources, articles, newspapers, chronicles, back in those periods, you'll find the real news. And if you look at some of the names of the people that were in positions of leadership at the time and have the ability to do research, similar research, 30, 40, 50, 100 years down the line up to today, you're going to find some of the same people with the last name of those people that were doing all that damage and killing that look so bad today. And I don't blame people not wanting this to be discussed anywhere, because if you do the research, you'll find some of your distant relatives that were initiating some of the same policies that you're initiating today. Just like if you would look at some of the Indians and some of the blacks that were doing things during that period, you're going to find that they were some of your relatives. And then those that had the ability to get out of slavery, get a business started, get a trade, they were able to send their kids to college. Those guys and girls were many times compromised, and they was given those opportunities that I told you. So therefore, they didn't want to be black either. And the Europeans told them, you are not like those others. And blacks start believing it. That's when they start making that bleaching glow, as I call it, to fix them up. If you look at the black men in the 50s and 60s, those that were professionals all had hair that was looking like European Americans. They call it the process. And the females were doing it too, and many are doing it today. They want to look like what I call the human enemies of mankind. Now, legally, that's fine. But now you find that a lot of people are getting sick because of all these chemicals that they've been using on their face and in their head and so forth. And it's going to be some major lawsuits filed. And then for 2 or 3 decades, it's going to be in the law, going to eventually get to the Supreme Court. And those people that are still alive, or a few that are still alive, will get $5 or $10 apiece.
Doc, it's a lot to unpack.
It is.
It's a lot to unpack, and we're going to have to stay with it. We're up against a commercial break. We're broadcasting live from right here in Jackson, Mississippi, at the We Believe Digital Broadcast Studio. We're going to take this commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Wedding, milestone anniversary, or corporate event, 5-Star Lodge is the rustic elegance you need for your event space. With hardwood and stunning chandeliers, this is just the beginning of the 5-star treatment. Our on-site venue manager will ensure all details exceed your expectations. We offer a luxurious bridal lounge, beautiful reception hall, cabins, and an outdoor pavilion on the water. Visit 5stareventlodge.com to get started on your memorable experience.
Welcome back to Socrates Garrett Live. We're broadcasting live from right here in Jackson, Mississippi, in the heart of the deep, deep, deep South. You've been viewing this program from We Believe Digital Broadcast Studios. We're the only African-American owned and operating broadcast studio in the state of Mississippi. Probably not many in the entire world. Our goal is to be able to chronicle and capture the achievements and the crises that are engaged in our community on a daily basis. We have our correspondents throughout the state of Mississippi, where we're dealing with Pastor James Hull up in Clarksdale, Mississippi, Cleveland. And we have Roger Bell down in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. We have Dr. Breland down in Biloxi, Mississippi. And so if it moves in Mississippi and if it affects the African American community, we intend to send a signal. You know, somebody has always got to send a signal. We've been talking about the Indian Nation, and the way they communicate was clearly with signals. Doc, I believe they had smoke signals. They were able to communicate that trouble is on the way.
That's right. And the blacks had the same signal, I would say similar signals, because you were not allowed to communicate and gather in groups. 3 was about the maximum. And you had to be headed to work then. You couldn't go to your own churches. You had to go to the white churches. You couldn't have political rallies. You couldn't even have your own black preachers preaching to you unless you slipped out at night and went down in the woods somewhere. It was very controlled and contained. But at the same time, a lot of black people made progress.
And we're making progress today on the one hand, and on the other hand, the community at large is falling behind.
Exactly.
So when we look at the overall scenario, we're not making progress.
No progress at all. I told you a few weeks ago, historically and statistically, black people are worse off today, which is, I believe, the 3rd of February, 2023, than they were in the late 1960s. We had more money, more land, more power, better leaders, better educated people than we have today. Now, I didn't say we had more college graduates. You know, a college degree does not make you educated. You can go and major in fixing horseshoes today at certain schools, but where you going to get a job putting horseshoes on a horse? So we have thousands and thousands of people throughout the country in all races that are going to college, majoring in things that are not going to help them. Matter of fact, it hurts them because they get in large debt. But that's just the bad news. The good news is, and solutions to all the problems that we've been addressing can be solved if the people in America want it to be solved. And I gave you an example last night. The state of Mississippi has so much money they don't even know what to do with. They haven't allocated yet, and they can solve every problem you mentioned in your introduction by end of March this year. The legislature's in office. They have about $4 billion. The other states have that much and more in the larger states. They have the same problem: poverty, lack of education, criminals running wild, and all kind of external and internal agitation from people that want to keep what they have. And all the leaders have to do is just reduce poverty by increasing the minimum wage, by encouraging the state leaders to fund early childhood education, by encouraging the local leaders to pass legislation that's going to consolidate the curriculum in the various schools where they have vocational and technical program in high schools and job training for the young people, so when they get out of high school with a diploma, they can go and start their own business or start working. The other thing they need to do, they can provide lower time and lower costs for the community college, the senior college, and the universities. I told you last night, you don't need to go to college or to university for 4, 6, or 8 years to get a degree in anything. It just takes a few months to almost learn anything you want to learn, whether it's from memory or from technical expertise.
Well, Doc, I get that. But until we build this new man, and I got to keep calling him that.
But that's exactly the name that you need to call.
Right. Until we get him corralled and get him re-educated and repositioned in our community, then we're not going to be able to do many of those things.
Well, not, but there is a remedy for that. See, when you have the number one person that's supposed to be your leader out there pretending to be your leader, you know you're not going to get anything done. So you stay away from those kind of people and do like the European Americans. You build your own man. So we have the resources and the time to train our own leaders, put them in religious institutions, in educational institutions, in politics, in business, and teach them leadership skills. And all this can be done in 7 years. And then start replacing those same people that are talking but not producing anything that's in elected and appointed offices. A lot of the preachers are similar. They are not doing anything for their members. And then the few that's in corporate positions. Now, we don't have to worry too much about the blacks that's in corporate positions because 95% of them don't have decision-making responsibility. They are there as assistants and supporters to those that make decisions. They don't spend the money, and they don't hire the people. Now, they might give a black person a big title as vice president of personnel, and all that person does is collect applications, send them to the person that's going to make the decision, and the person that makes the decision usually is not a black person, unless now it's the janitor, the security officer, and the cook. All those other decisions are made by others. The banker, for instance, that's working in the bank, the so-called black man or black woman, most of them only make a decision if you can borrow $5,000 or less. If it's more than that in many states and areas and banks, you have to take it to a committee. You get no results from the leaders that they have in these positions of responsibility. They know it, you know it, and it has always been that way. So if you don't create your own schools, your own businesses, your own banks, your own hospitals, you're not going to get good care, because people that want to keep you in a position of non-responsibility, where you're relegated to the lowest strata of society, you then find that if you don't do it yourself, your situation is going to get worse, Mr. Garrett. It's going to get worse, and history is proving this every day.
Now, Doc, we got to go back and understand a little bit better. Now, you mentioned that there was something called breeding camps. I need to understand, what is a breeding camp? What are you talking about?
Well, according to the old newspapers and other books and private journals that people put together, you can find that they had a major piece of legislation that passed around 1880. First, they abolished slavery in Europe. And then around 1880, they said you can have slaves in America, but you got to abolish bringing the slaves from Africa too. So around 1808, you couldn't transport slaves from Africa on those ships, even though many were able to get through because they conspired with the police and others, and they were able to bring slaves in. But legally, you couldn't bring them in from 1808, I believe. That's the last year you could bring them in. So therefore, they messed around and found new technologies and so forth. So therefore, in a few years, they needed more slaves. So anybody know that if you are accustomed to delegating all the hard work to other people, and your slave routes have been contained by legislation, and you can't bring in more from Africa, and you need more every year, you have to create them. Where are you going to buy them from? You can't buy them from the Virgin Islands. You had to either slip them in or create your own slaves. And that's where they ended up with the breeding camps. And according to the old literature, they were in all states. But some states and counties were famous for it. Their slaves didn't work in the plantation. They was like the Wall Street plantation, where they dealt in specific things, delegation of responsibility. And they would pass those boys and those girls around to other plantations to produce those babies.
So
now that is a historical fact.
And that is a tragedy in itself, and it's deplorable and it's disgusting. And can you imagine then 11, 12-year-old girls would have to be a part of this breeding camp?
But see, I can imagine, but the people that were causing it didn't want to imagine it, because those little girls you were talking about and those boys 15 and older that were forced to do that were not considered human beings. If you look at some of the charts and some of the records, Mr. Socrates, you will find those slaves were right next page where the property, the cattle, the machines, the barns, and all the supplies were. They were not considered human beings, so if you're not dealing with a human being and you done told someone that these people are savages, they are not human, they just 1 inch above a savage, and we don't think they are significant, and we're going to do them any way we want. So you don't feel bad when you step on a rat or a roach. You don't feel bad.
I just hate that analogy.
I know it, but I'm going to have to give you the historical fact.
I hate that analogy. No, you wouldn't feel bad if you stepped on a rat. Now, Doc, if it happened to the Indians all over America, can you see a scenario where African Americans would be gathered up and marched off to Oklahoma or some designated area?
No, I don't see that. They don't have to do that. It's too many. All they have to do is do what they have planned to do since the so-called end of slavery, where you concentrate black folks in a certain area. You don't have to take them anywhere. You concentrate them in a certain area, lock them out of your area, lock them out of your businesses, and make them dependent on you economically, and keep them in a concentrated area where they are maintained with one way in and one way out. They leave there to go and work, make that minimum wage or less, and go back in those areas. And your legislation will be that they cannot buy homes in the suburbs. I told you a few weeks ago, they most certainly not going to have but one or two of you in the gated communities. And as they do that, you find, and the history will show, that in 15 to 30 or 40 years in most cities, the same people then that say you got to live in this ghettoized area, and they did the Jews the same way in Germany and some other European countries, they would then move them out of those areas and take over those areas. And in Mississippi, the South, and throughout the United States, they're going to lock these blacks up in these inner city relocation camps. They're going to have some in the rural area. And they already have about 109 relocation camps already fully furnished with coffins and other things. And they are basically on military bases in the United States. The president already has had the power for at least 60 years to have martial law anytime he or she feels is necessary, where all the powers are taken from the local police, the local state legislature, and the federal government will take over. And that's why they have these relocation camps already planned, and they're going to give the cities and the states the ability to do their individual in respective areas the same way. Lock them in and lock them out.
Wow. You were watching WeBelieveDigital.com, Socrates Garrett Live. You know, Dr. Henderson's comments are disturbing. And yet, is so much truth in everything that he's saying. And the plan for African Americans in the future. He's articulated some things that we better put on our radar and see exactly what is happening. Concentration camps, urban ghettos. We already in Mississippi have the highest number of prisoners percentage of our population incarcerated than anywhere in the world. So you gotta wake up out here, people. And I'm not talking about just African Americans. We're talking about, European brothers and sisters that believe in doing right. There have always been some good white folk out here that were concerned about the life and the quality of life of others. But as Martin Luther King said, it's the appalling silence of good people that disturbed him the most. It wasn't the loud cry of the hate groups. It was the appalling silence of good folk that disturbed him the most. We want good folk to come to this platform. We want to open this platform up to all that will come. We want to understand exactly what is going on today in Mississippi and the rest of the world and how it impacts African Americans. While we focus on African Americans because that is our race, that is our ethnic group. Someone has to focus specifically on that group and its well-being and what's going on today. Now, we come to you each and every Friday trying to sound the alarm, trying to say that there are some difficult days ahead. Martin said that he had been to the mountaintop and he was not afraid because he knew then they were going to kill him. And so he went to the mountaintop and declared that his eyes had seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Dr. Henderson and I have not been to no mountaintop and we have not seen anything like that. So we expect to be here fighting this fight and taking the opposition on, whether it be friendly fire from black people or whether it be fire from our traditional oppressor. We just want to send a warning out to black America as well, those that are acting out and carrying out the plans of the European nation. We want to send a warning out to you that our cities and our communities are on the edge. It's very volatile. Any day you could spark a riot that would tear up our southern cities in a way that was done like Watts happened, the riots in Watts in California. When we see 5 African-American police people brutally murder Tyree Nichols up in Memphis, Tennessee, it does not go unnoticed in Jackson, Mississippi. It does not go unnoticed all over the world. And so we want to say to our brothers and our sisters that are carrying out the plans and executing the plans of the Master that it will not be tolerated, that we will not stand idly by and march to slaughter like sheep. We're going to have to take a stand, and we're going to have to take a position that demonstrates that we are desirous of the same quality of life and respect that everyone else enjoys in America. So far, it has eluded us. The black man, since his arrival, has not become much more than someone's property, someone telling him where to go and when to go, whether he's going to be able to eat and how long he's going to stay there. Freedom is a long ways from the experience of the African American in this country. And so we are fighting for it every day so that our children will enjoy the fruits of America, where they'll be able to be free from racism and bigotry and oppression. And when you lift those shackles off of any human being, off of any ethnic group, you will see that we rise. Still we rise and accomplish and achieve more than many. Dr. Henderson, it's been a great evening with you. You got any parting comments?
I most certainly do, sir. You mentioned Dr. Martin Luther King about going to the top of the mountain, that he's been over there and he said, my days are short. I have no intention, and you don't, and any other black shouldn't be interested in going to the top of the mountain and looking over, they're going to see the same thing. Our job, sir, is to stay in the valley with the dry bones and connect those dry bones so we can have our own remade man, remade women and children, and make our own institutions. We call this self-determination. That's why I always advocate that you organize and don't criticize. I would care less about going to the mountain and knowing that I'm going to dead instead of coming down on the mountain, getting in the valley for dry bones, where the people are, figuratively speaking, and reconnect them, retrain them, remake them, renew them with their new training, the new education, the new culture, the new religion, and say, you are your own man.
Wow.
It's simple.
Wow.
Simple.
You heard it from Dr. Henderson. He's passionate about this. He understands and believes that we can change our own conditions. We don't need any help to do that. And so I, too, believe in what he's saying. And so we're going to come back to you next week, and we're going to try and continue this conversation. Like they say in church, if we can save just one,
That's right.
it would have been a great day. I want you to enjoy your weekend and stay safe. Good night.